Shabbat Shalom. Shalom Aleichem. Assalamu Alaikum. Welcome to Nehemiah chapter 3. This is a re-recording because we are having sound issues with the previous upload. So we're re-recording this for you. In verse 32, I should say 32 verses in this chapter. In verse 1, it reads 100 versus mea, and that means the same as 100. It's a translation of the word mea. Verse 3, roofed it versus laid the beams. So roofed it means to create a roof. Doesn't mean you throw something on the roof. That's an expression that was used. I don't know if it's still used nowadays, but when you roof something, you throw it on the roof. That's not what this is referring to. Verse 4, reached to versus repaired. And then it says here, took his place, and then repaired in the Masoretic. So it's interesting that it uses different terms in the Septuagint. It is referring to repaired, as we will see later on in this chapter. Verse 5, Adorim versus, I should say footnote, is nobles. So I might use a thumbnail for the Adorim. Applied versus put. Not so much of a difference there. Verse 6, repaired the old gate was omitted. They covered it in versus they laid the beams thereof. Verse 8, an addition of repaired. And they it says smiths versus goldsmiths in verse 8. Okay, I'm not going to in verse 8. Let me show you. There it is, repaired. And then smiths, goldsmiths. I like to show the verses so you don't just take my word for it. It is in the scripture. And then finally, repaired is mentioned in the Septuagint. So it does say repaired. So that is what is being done. There's repairs being done to the wall, to the city. And then it says they finished Jerusalem versus fortified. Verse 14, there's an omission of he and his sons. And they covered it versus they built it. Or he built it, rather. Verse 15, of the skins versus of Siloah, which means tent or sent in Hebrew. Sent. Meadow of the king versus garden. Verse 16, garden of David's sepulchre. So that word garden was omitted in the Masoretic. Verse 19 now. The tower of ascent versus over against the going up to the armory. So two different places. A portion, says another portion of the tower of ascent versus another piece over against the going up. So is it referring to a tower or simply stairway or traveling upwards towards the armory? A lot of questions to be asked regarding that place in the Masoretic. Verse 20, a second portion versus earnestly repaired the other piece. Verse 22, echekar versus of the plain, and in the Hebrew it is kikar. Most likely a translation of the name. Skipping ahead to verse 26, there's an omission of the word garden. Then verse 30, treasury versus chamber. And I was talking about in the previous upload how a treasury most likely contains the valuables, whether it's the wealth or the gold or the treasures, obviously treasures, or resources. A chamber is a bedroom. Okay, so those are two different places. Why would he sleep in his treasury? And why would he keep valuables like treasures in his chamber? I'm talking about greater wealth than just for an individual, for the community. Or maybe it says his treasury. Okay, so could it be his own personal treasury? Doesn't seem to be that's the case, but it could be wrong. Verse 31, Sarefi versus goldsmith. And that's a translation of the word, Sorefi, goldsmith. House, as far as the house versus place. And then chapman, which is an old term, which means dealer or merchant. And it says merchants in the Masoretic, which means it's a trader, rakal in the Hebrew. But chapman is not typically a word used nowadays, so that's why I bring it up. And then it says steps of the corner versus going up of the corner. Okay, so that's all for these differences in chapter 3 of Nehemiah. So thank you very much for your time. Until next time, I bid you all Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum, Erini Mazisu, Pax Vobiscum, peace be unto you, and Maranatha.